All right, let's dive right into the fundamentals of criminal law. We're going to break down this huge topic in just a few minutes, and you'll see how this system, believe it or not, touches all of our lives every single day. So what's the connection? Well, it's this. They're both part of the exact same system, criminal law. I know, that sounds like a massive jump, right? A parking ticket and a murder trial. But trust me, by the end of this, you'll see exactly how the legal system connects that little piece of paper on your windshield to the most serious trial you can imagine. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at this idea of a tale of two laws, how we separate a personal fight from a crime against all of us. Then we'll get into sizing up the crime itself, from minor to major. After that, we'll ask the big question, what's the whole point of punishment anyway? And finally, we'll figure out where these powerful laws actually come from in the first place. All right, let's jump into our first section. Whenever something goes wrong, the legal system has to make a choice. Because here's the thing, not every legal mess is actually a crime. The whole system starts by splitting everything into two totally different worlds. Okay, so on one side, you've got civil law. Think of this as private fights. One person suing another or a company suing a person. The goal here, it's usually about getting compensation, making the victim whole again, typically with money. But then you have criminal law, and this is a whole different ballgame. A crime isn't seen as just hurting one person. It's an offense against society, against all of us. So the goal isn't compensation, it's punishment. And that's exactly why the standard of proof is so much higher. In a civil case, you just need a preponderance of the evidence. It just has to be a little more likely than not, like tipping the scales 51 to 49. But for a criminal case, whoa, the prosecution has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Those scales have to be slammed down on one side. It's a huge difference.
And if you want a perfect, real-world example of this in action, look no further than the O.J. Simpson case. It's fascinating. In his criminal trial for murder, the jury had to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. And, well, they weren't. He was found not guilty. But then came this civil trial for wrongful death. The standard there was way lower, just that preponderance of the evidence. Was it more likely than not that he was responsible? And that jury said yes. They found him liable and ordered him to pay millions. So you have the exact same act, but because of those two totally different standards of proof, you get two completely different outcomes.
Okay, so we've established what a crime is. Now the system has to figure out, well, how bad is it? Because let's be real, not all crimes are created equal. Generally, you can sort crimes into three main buckets. Down at the bottom, you have infractions. These are the least serious things, right? Think of a traffic ticket. It's annoying, you pay a fine, but your life isn't really turned upside down. Then you take a step up to misdemeanors. Now we're getting more serious. These are crimes that can land you in a local jail for up to a year. And then, at the very top of the pyramid, you have felonies. These are the most serious crimes we have, and they're punishable by more than a year in a state prison. But of course, it's not always that simple. The law loves its gray areas, and that's where you get these things called wobblers. Just like the name sounds, these are crimes that can, well, wobble between the two categories. Depending on the specific details of the case and maybe the defendant's criminal history, the prosecutor has the power to decide, are we going to charge this as a less serious misdemeanor, or are we going to go for the much more serious felony? So we've got our categories, we know how serious things are, but that brings us to a really fundamental question. What is the justice system actually trying to do when it punishes someone? What's the goal? And it's not as straightforward as you might think. Really, the system is juggling 5 different and sometimes even competing ideas. First up, you've got deterrence. This is the classic scared straight idea. The thinking is, if we make the punishment harsh enough, people just won't do the crime in the first place. And this works in 2 ways. There's specific deterrence, which is aimed at the individual offender, making sure that one person never does it again. And then there's general deterrence, which is about making an example out of that person to scare off everyone else in society from trying the same thing. Next up is incapacitation. And this one is probably the most simple and direct goal of them all. The logic is pretty straightforward. If a dangerous person is behind bars, they literally cannot commit more crimes and harm people out in society. It's all about physically removing the threat. Then you have something totally different, rehabilitation. This one isn't so much about punishing as it is about, well, fixing the problem. The goal here is to get at the root causes of why the person committed the crime in the first place. Maybe it's addiction, maybe it's a lack of job skills, and transform them into a law-abiding citizen who won't reoffend.
Fourth on our list is retribution, and this one is really about a sense of moral justice. It's that gut feeling of an eye for an eye. This isn't about preventing future crime or rehabilitating anyone. It's purely about the past. It's the idea that the offender simply deserves to be punished for what they did, to balance the scales and give victims and society a sense of closure. And finally, we have restitution. This one shifts the focus almost entirely to the victim. The main purpose here is to make the victim financially whole again. It's about requiring the offender to pay back the value of what they stole or broke or the medical bills they caused. It's about repairing the harm, at least in a monetary sense. So as you can see, the purpose of punishment is this constant tug of war between all 5 of these very different philosophies.
Okay, so we've got all these complex ideas about what a crime is and why we punish it, but that begs a huge question. Where do these rules even come from? Who is writing the rule book for this whole entire system?
Well, it basically comes from 3 main sources, and you can think of them stacked up like a pyramid. At the very bottom, the foundation, you have case law. This is law that's made by judges, decision by decision, in their written opinions on individual cases. Building on top of that is statutory law. These are the laws that are written and passed by our elected representatives, in Congress or in your state legislature. But at the very, very top of the pyramid, the supreme law of the land is constitutional law. That's the U.S. Constitution and state constitutions. And nothing, no statute, no court decision from the lower levels can ever violate what's in the Constitution. And that foundation, that case law, is held together by this really important principle called stare decisis. It's a Latin term, and it literally means to stand by things decided. What this means is that courts are bound to follow the decisions made in previous similar cases, what we call precedent. And this is absolutely crucial because it's what makes our legal system stable and predictable. You know that the law today is probably going to be the law tomorrow. So let's pull it all together. We've seen how the whole system works, how it draws a line between a private wrong and a public crime, how it ranks those crimes by seriousness, and all the different reasons it gives for punishment. And we've seen that this entire structure is built on a foundation of laws that stretch from a single judge's decision all the way up to the Constitution itself. But all of this leaves us with the biggest, most important question of all. Our laws are supposed to define justice, but what should that justice actually be trying to achieve? Is its main goal to heal, to punish, or simply to protect? Because the answer we choose really defines the kind of society we all live in.